Agent Morris with the NSA.
We have identified some very, very interesting anomalous type of aircraft.
Traffic is quite luminous and is exhibiting some non-ballistic motion. Over.
Move very rapidly at any speed or rather any direction it wanted to go. Fly could change and go to the right or the left or go crossways without hesitating a bit.
What do you think it was?
Well, if they call it a flying saucer, that's what it is.
EWA 517, do you want to report a UFO? Over. Negative. We don't want to report.
Look, it wasn't my worst Wednesday night.
Good evening, everybody. This is Smiles Lewis, and you are tuned into the very first ever Anomaly Now news roundup for Wednesday nights. This is going to be a new weekly Weird Wednesday sort of a thing that we'll be doing here live via our various streaming platforms, our YouTube channel and our Facebook page. And I think we might actually be going out to Twitter right now. I'm just not sure. We've got some other accounts that we'll start incorporating eventually. Again, I'm Smiles Lewis, and this is the latest in a series of shows that is going to be featured here as part of the Anomaly Archives, Scientific Anomaly Institute's public awareness and outreach efforts. We are a 501c3 nonprofit based here in Austin, Texas. We were founded in 2003 with the mission and goals of the preservation of materials related to anomalistics, anything strange in the field of science, whether it be consciousness studies, UFO research, cryptozoology, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, that sort of thing, or just the mysteries, well, like I said, of consciousness. What is it? What are altered states of consciousness? Can the human mind access information and sensory input remotely in a sort of sixth sense or psychic way? These are all areas that the Anomaly Archives covers in its preservation efforts. These are sometimes the files of UFO researchers or experiencers of these strange phenomena. We have the personal correspondence and personal archives of a number of UFO and paranormal researchers from right here in Central Texas, and ever-growing collection, over 7,000 items. That's just the books, and then we have thousands of periodicals and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, right now we are still closed due to the current pandemic COVID-19 crisis. Here in Austin, Texas, things aren't so bad, but out of an abundance of caution and also related to the facility that we are in, right downtown, just east of Interstate 35, that's where we're physically located. And we're still doing these other events. We started back in February of this year a new monthly meetup series that was scheduled for the second Saturdays of each month. And we were launching a physical in-person series of lecture events and presentations at our wonderful facility there at 55 North IH 35, the corner of Lambie Street and the northbound IH 35 frontage road. You can find more information about us at our website, anomalyarchives.org. And as I say, we are, in fact, a nonprofit 501c3. So we could always use your tax-deductible donations, and we're always looking to archive and preserve more materials. The other aspect of our mission and goals is public education about those collections. And so we do these kinds of events about materials that are in the collection or that should be, and we're going to try to get those in there. So back in February, we launched our first in-person monthly meetup, and that was launching a new Anomaly Adventure Club, where we were trying to rekindle the spirit of adventure and the inquisitive imagination that was embodied by the early 1920s, 1930s Adventure Club, where a series of people gathered together and gave stories, and there was a pulp not a fiction, but a pulp magazine that published called Adventure Magazine that chronicled these kinds of adventures. And our good friends Anita Excess and Victor Criterion were the first presenters for that February monthly meetup. But of course, with March and the shelter-in-place lockdown, we had to move that to the online realm. And so we've been doing that ever since. Not been able to do it every month, but we're still trying. And we've got a bunch of those available on our YouTube channel. We'll talk more about that later. But right now, I'd just like to go ahead and bring on my co-host, Mark Jackson. And let's see. Mark, hey, how's it going?
Hey, good evening, Miles. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. I wish it were in person, but that'll be soon enough, I'm sure.
Yeah, you mentioned that February meetup, and I know we'll talk more about that later, but what a great turnout, huh? To just kick something off like that, and then to fill that room up. And of course, our adventure guides took us on quite the trip. What a success. I can't wait till we can get back in that flow and back on that schedule. Good stuff.
Yeah, it'll be great to actually see people in person again and have that more traditional in-person physical presence interaction. So just want to give a brief introduction to Mark and our audience. Mark and I met just over a year ago, thanks to a mutual friend here in Austin, Robert Powell. Robert Powell is a past research director for the MUFON UFO organization. He used to be their director of research. And at that time, when he was still doing that, several years ago, we had him as a speaker at one of these lectures for the Anomaly Archives audience. That video is available online. And it was a very interesting presentation. He, of course, it was one of the main MUFON investigators for the Stephenville, Texas mass flap wave of sightings near the Crawford Ranch, I believe, where the then president was, or I think that's around where it was. And he also was a contributing author to a really good book on UFOs and the government. It's an anthology called something to that effect, The History of UFOs and Government. And I highly recommend that. But one day he calls me up and says, hey, I think there's somebody you need to meet. We should go have lunch and get to know each other. And that's where I got to meet Mark Jackson. And when I started talking about the Anomaly Archives, he just lit up. And I love to see that kind of enthusiasm from people, from like-minded people who have a passion for these sort of topics. And sure enough, like a kid in the candy store, we got to show him the archives, and he's been a regular there ever since. Though we, like I say, have been closed the last few months. So, you are a geologist by trade and professionally. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. So
you consider yourself a scientist. You are a scientist.
Well, I've studied under some really good scientists. I could put it that way. How much I absorbed, or how much they, what insights they felt comfortable sharing with me, we'll never know. But I'm oriented,
Yeah. Well, it's great to have you here. I know we also from that first meeting, talked about a lot of podcasts and radio shows and all the material, the multimedia that's out there on these subjects, particularly UFOs. I think that's one of our main overlaps of interest. Though you've recently made me aware that you also have a pretty big interest in cryptozoology, or at least one particular cryptid, and we can get into that at some point. But we started talking about doing a podcast together, and here we are. So this is a great way for us to do a more regular outreach to the public, to the growing anomaly community, whether it be here in Austin or Central Texas or parts beyond. That's the great thing about the internet. So with this show, we're just going to be doing a really quick 30 minutes once a week. We may go over sometimes, and in the future, we may expand to doing some more traditional interviews, and we may not always end up being on a Wednesday. But for now, I think Wednesdays are always good. And my choosing of Wednesdays for shows that I've done over the years has been a direct result of the UFO phenomena and one of my favorite UFO researchers, John Keel. Keel early on, I think it was in his book Operation UFOs, Operation Trojan Horse, where he talked about from all the thousands of cases that he had investigated as a journalist traveling this country, investigating strange encounters, close encounters with UFOs and other strange, mysterious phenomena, said that he saw in the data a trend for more sightings to occur on Wednesdays than any other day of the week, trending towards Thursday. Now, maybe that trending has now shifted, and I haven't seen anybody actually replicate his understanding of the data. And as others have said, John Keel wasn't afraid to make stuff up anyway. So, but John Keel's another one of those people that I just really always was fascinated by and thought was a great writer. So here we are, Wednesday night. Well, the main focus of these shows is going to be covering the current news that's making the rounds in the paranormal, UFO, parapsychological, all these different, the world of esoterica, as some like to call it. And, there's always an abundance of news articles, particularly, what's the latest sighting, what's the latest, clearly an IFO, but the populace and the media are going crazy over it. And with the recent developments over the last 3 years since the revelation about the Pentagon's UFO program, ATIP, OSAP, all that, and Tom DeLonge's championing of his new To the Stars Academy, there's never a shortage of new information along those lines. And so we're just going to kind of, this first show, we're going to really let's get our feet wet with how we want to proceed. But I did want to, before we go into some of the news, there's just some things I really wanted to touch on. The first is a sad note. I did find out this past weekend that a sort of a mentor, definitely somebody I respected greatly, has passed away, and that was jim-beal, James Beal. He was an electromagnetics expert and was, I believe, a past board member of the Monroe Institute, or at least maybe their friends group, very active in the metaphysical, new age, alternative research arena. He had patents related to, I believe, how to create stronger welds on spacecraft using electromagnetic fields. And he was an inspirational figure for me, in that he, as much negative information as one tends to come across in the realms of electromagnetics and the possible deleterious health effects, he was one to always say, yes, but there are also tons of known positive health effects and the things that one can do to protect themselves. And if you're interested in finding out more about Jim Beal and his legacy, you should check out EMF, as in electromagnetic field, emfinterface.com, and that'll redirect you to a temporary site where most of his material is currently archived, and I believe that website should be revamped very soon. But yeah, he passed about a week ago, but it wasn't sudden or unexpected, and his wonderful wife, Roberta Shoemaker Beal, she and he had been preparing for this for a long time, and I know that she's very comfortable in the knowledge that he's in a better place, and that's just wanted to honor him with that. So emfinterface.com, and that'll get you to some information about Jim Beal's site. This month of September, Mark, you've heard me probably mention endlessly, as the audience has, that it was September 2001 when I was organizing the National UFO Conference, the 38th annual one here in Austin, that unfortunately had to be canceled due to the terrible events of September 11th, 2001. And so it's this time of year that always kind of reminds me of that. And it's been very strange witnessing the rise of the virtual UFO and paranormal conference. I am both ecstatic that is happening, but sad that it's the result of the current COVID situation. But hey, make lemonade when you got the lemons, right? So I did just want to, pay homage to the fact that there's this wealth of organizations that have launched a series of online events and online conferences. We mentioned SCU, Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, that Robert Powell and Rich Hoffman and others are associated with. They haven't actually done a whole conference yet. They originally were going to have their second SCU conference, their first being last year, very highly successful at Redstone Arsenal in Alabama. But the second one, I believe, has been at least postponed, if not canceled, until further notice. But they have been using, like everybody, like we're using the internet to stream lectures on these subjects. So you can find more about the lectures that they've been doing, about one a month for the last 3 months, over at their SCU, Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. As a fellow Austinite into UFOs, I really want to see them supported, and I think that they do some really good research as far as the more conservative line of UFO research goes, UAP research, as they rebranded it for themselves. Yeah, so there's also some online UFO conferences, big and small. If you're interested, unfortunately, I just didn't get the chance to publicize this one, but the UFO Lockdown Fest 2, put on by Central Texan Jane Kiley, UFO Jane, as she's called. She runs a website, Texas UFO Sightings, and the Weird UFO Show. She put on a free one earlier in the lockdown, in the shelter-in-place period, and has since put on this second one. I think it was just last weekend, UFO Lockdown Festival 2. You can find out stuff about those lectures and panel discussions and so forth at her YouTube channel. And coming up real soon here is PhenomenaCon number 2. And this was a really fantastic online conference put on by the Newkirks. These are the folks that put together that Hellier series that some of you may have seen on Netflix. And they are the purveyor of a fine community facilitated through Patreon and Facebook called ParaMuseum, Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and Occult. That's coming up. And my friend Adam Sayne, who does the Conspirinormal podcast, is putting on his second conference, Strange Realities 2. The first one in Nashville last year was a success, and that was an in-person one. So, but of course, this time around, they're doing it virtually, and that is available. You can find out more by searching for Strange Realities 2. And the big boy, IUFOC, the International UFO Conference. You know, I've never been to one of theirs. It's highly expensive, and it's great. They have a film festival and awards, and I always hear great stories from my friends who've attended there, but haven't been able to make it to that one. But it is now a streaming event as well, and all the big names are going to be there. And more locally is the Otherworld Sci-Fi Film Fest, who hosted us last year in their lobby when we tabled there as the Anomaly Archives for their 2019 science fiction film fest. Anyway, moving right along. Wow. Okay, so in the news this week, we have signs of life. There's been several news reports about the Royal Astronomical Society reporting on the discovery of phosphine on Venus, in the clouds of Venus. So, you know, for those of us involved in UFO interest, you know, it's always novel to see and hear about this kind of news. It certainly does stack up as, I think, big news of a variety, but it's not always exactly what we're hoping for, in the form of like, wow, they look at, here's pictures of a little creature, or something as interesting as that. So we'll post these links to these news articles in a show note page for this episode on the website in the near future. You know, you and I were talking about this as far as the nature of the foundations of life, and whether this really is as big of a deal. I will say, you know, Venus is one of those places that's not usually considered, aside from UFO contactee circles, as a place for traditional life to exist. It's considered to be fairly inhospitable. Maybe not as inhospitable as Mercury or some other, you know, that would be on the smaller end and more extreme environment. But you know, I mentioned another headline that's actually from a couple of months ago, but what caught my attention this time was the fact that it was being promoted by Northrop Grumman, the military contract, and I guess they probably have their hands in a lot of different pies besides military hardware, but they published something back in April called Hiding in Plain Sight, The Arguments for Invisible Aliens. And, that really struck a chord with me, not least of which because, some of the things that they talk about are exactly the kinds of points made by these articles covering the signs of life, the phosphine in the clouds of Venus, in terms of the building blocks of life. But this idea that there could be some kind of invisible ecosystem, some shadow ecosystem right here. And they use the obvious examples of places we wouldn't expect life to exist, volcanic vents at the bottom of the ocean and that sort of thing. But, that's, again, old hat for anybody who's watched old Jacques Cousteau or nature documentaries. But again, it struck me as kind of odd that Northrop Grumman, of all places, would be perhaps cashing in on the interest in these subjects. Lo and behold, at the very bottom of the article is are you looking for a career? Then maybe consider us. So maybe this is their way of trying to look to see if they can get the next, former military industrial insider like Tom DeLonge has tried to put together. But it reminds me of so many other things, including one of my fondest ideas that's doesn't originate with me, but this idea of the what John Keel and others called ultra-terrestrials, or what Mac Tonnies later called crypto-terrestrials. It kind of morphed into another idea phrased as a breakaway civilization. But this idea that there could be what if the UFOs, what if what we think of as aliens are not aliens, that they are just other inhabitants of this planet? Is there some way that they could have either evolved here separately or branched off from us early on? And of course, the wilder parts of this go into all the fun stuff like the inner Earth and the hollow Earth, and these ideas that, well, maybe this civilization is either inside the planet, and that's part of how they're staying crypto, how they're keeping hidden, or perhaps, maybe they're just under the oceans, maybe they're at the bottom, and lo and behold, where are we hearing about all these the documented military sightings, but from the naval arm of the military in terms
it's getting
of
wild with the OSU thing,
ATIP,
the USOs, excuse me. First of all, Miles, what a great in aggregate, what a nice collection of stories for everybody out there. In one spot, you're gonna have access to all this stuff, all the hard work's done on the back end. So you talk about one-stop shopping. What I noticed today in the order that we have these, the first two stories aren't, they're more related than you would think. So we got to think about things that the eyeballs can't see. So we're talking about the spectral light ranges that go beyond, what we see in red, green, blue, for example. We don't see in infrared or any of the expanded spectral ranges. But yet here on this planet, we know that many animals utilize additional or expanded spectral ranges to sense information in their environment. And so in our first story about the phosphine, that's exactly the methodology they use to detect these gases, were non-visible spectral ranges. And then as you segue into the invisible aliens notion with Northrop Grumman, there's your continuity across the different stories. And so they're both kind of, the first story about the phosphine is leveraging the technology as we understand it today to find additional insights, whereas the Northrop one is using that same foundation then to speculate a step further, which is a little bit more into that recruiting tool aspect that you pointed out. But they're very related, and I'm glad you put up the links. We won't go into too much detail tonight. I would want to say, though, if you guys do read the article about the phosphine and potential for life in the atmosphere of Venus, remember this notion was basically first championed by Carl Sagan in like 1963. So he had first identified the stratigraphy of atmospheres. And then what you do is you correlate pressure and temperature regimes across the stratigraphy of your atmosphere. Just like how you'd have layers of rocks, you're going to have different densities and different compositions of the layer of an atmosphere. So basically what on Venus in particular, you're looking at somewhere in the range of about 40 to 70 kilometers up into the atmosphere. is where we find conditions that are very similar to what we call one atmosphere on Earth. So that would be like one atmosphere of pressure. That's like when you're standing on the surface of the Earth, so it doesn't crush us. It's not going to crush them. But then also the temperature range. So look at it about 60 to 65 degrees. So up there in the stratigraphy of the atmosphere of Venus is this very balmy little layer, this little pesky layer that Sagan had pointed out, where he said, man, we really got to look there. You read the article, scientists love to take credit for everything, but if you really go back and look at this, Sagan was all over this decades ago. They called it very speculative. You know, the fact that Sagan, you know, this many years later is being taken seriously enough to where they're using his principles and approaches to apply very expensive equipment. Anyway, my point is, it just shows the legacy that he left behind in terms of some of this, and really setting the stage for the kind of stories that we're literally reading tonight.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah. And one other thing that Northrop Grumman article reminded me of is another wonderful man I met through, like jim-beal, through my local consciousness community of friends, the different nonprofits that I've been involved with, was a gentleman named Ravi, who he unfortunately passed away about 5 years ago suddenly. But when we'd had conversations, and he was very much a hard skeptic, but he was also open-minded, like the best skeptics. And when we once talked about what he thought about the likelihood of extraterrestrial life and UFOs, he said, well, what interests him the most, because he started really getting into biology, even though he was more of a physics, electrical engineer kind of a guy. What really fascinated him was what he described, and I'm probably not the best person to try to describe this to the lay audience, but he kind of phrased it as a left-hand molecule life forms. And he basically talked about how he explained to me how there could be these whole other range of life forms that would be a completely different biology than us. That's if we are the right hand path, so to speak, in terms of traditional biology, or the way we think of as traditional biology, that there could be these other and I don't know if it's a spin on the molecules or why he was calling it left hand per se, but he was absolutely certain. He was like, this is something that could exist. It's not something that you would think would be in our neck of the universe, but there, to his knowledge, wouldn't be any reason why it wouldn't, and it could be right in front of us and we wouldn't see it. So,
well, you know, the good thing is we now have those analogs here on Earth due to a number of different universities. But I think one of the more relevant examples is a type of bacteria, or microorganism, let's call it that. And this has got a great name because some people might recognize it for its correlation to the New York State lake. But that's the Schwannella onididennis bacterial community, okay? This was first identified in a lake up there. This is very similar to the type of organism that they believe is producing this phosphine. And basically, these are known as extremophiles. Extremophiles are biological life, particularly microorganisms that we didn't think had an analog here on Earth. They were speculated for a very long time. But now that we've gotten better instruments and we've actually taken the step to go look in these extreme environments for life, think of the tailing ponds of the Butte School of Mines in Montana, your volcanic environments, Iceland, you mentioned earlier the black smokers at the bottom of the ocean, hydrothermal vents, you name it. Everywhere we're looking now, we're finding organisms that respirate, essentially, that's what we're talking about here, in environments that are devoid of any of the elements that you would normally think could be combined to sustain life or create respiration, right? To metabolize, that's really what that means. And so they're getting their food from very unconventional source chemicals, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, and it all goes back to the simple idea that life will find a way. Not to sound like Jeff Goldblum from Jurassic Park or something, but it's, I mean, if you just think about it, like, okay, you're walking along the sidewalk, and what do you see breaking up through it? Life.
Yeah.
What do you see at the top of the highest mountain? Life. Yeah. Then if you factor in, like, panspermia and the idea of things that can survive in outer space and waft into new ecosystems and take root and get started. So
for every time you find one of these things, Miles, really quickly, it just opens up this whole new, it's never that simple. You're never just going to find a bug floating in a cloud, because there's something known as cosmic radiation. So how the heck does a microorganism in an atmosphere survive the bombardment of constant cosmic radiation? So then you look to this notion of, okay, Venus doesn't have a very stable atmosphere, but what we do know is in the presence of the solar winds coming off the sun, the speed at which the solar winds bombard what little atmosphere Venus has, it ionizes the surface of its atmosphere, essentially, giving it a magnetosphere, which of course then protects it from the cosmic radiation. So for every little piece of life, you're going to find all the other physics behind it that make it actually possible, versus just the idea of, hey, we found a squiggling little bug. So we're finding new ecosystems, like these cosmic ecosystems, that are very exciting, because with life comes a much large platform by which it functions in, right?
Yeah. And just, yeah, of course, the disclosure crowd, the people who think that, we are in the midst of the finally the revelation that there are extraterrestrials and that the government knows all and is just doling out this information drip by drip. Maybe that's true. I don't really subscribe to that idea, but I think that's just the nature of the drip that is a scientific discovery, and which doesn't necessarily factor in actual cover up, which we do know does occasionally happen. But well, we're already just at the half-hour mark, but there was that one other article news item that's not really paranormal or UFO related, but it kind of goes to this idea about other intelligences here on the planet, and this is the orchestrated attacks, as I call them.
I love this story.
The killer whales, I believe, off the coast of Spain. That it appears that there is at least one pod of these largest, smartest mammals swimming in our oceans, our oceans, in the oceans, and they may have taken offense to us calling them our oceans. They've apparently repeatedly been attacking sailing ships, tugboats, a variety of ships, and of course, there's all kinds of speculation as to what could possibly be going on here. Is this some kind of actual intelligent, organized effort? Is it an attempt at communication? I mean, clearly something's being communicated, anger at the very least. So much speculation has centered around the possible terrible effects of acoustic pollution and electromagnetic pollution as caused by our technology, whether it be the engines of the ships or the advanced radars and other type of ELF that are used for communication by subs and militaries around the world. But it seems so sudden and specific here that there may be something else going on. I mean, I would hate to just say, oh, maybe they're crazy, maybe they've all been infected by something and it's affecting their mental processes. But it's a very interesting story, and I'll be fascinated to see if they learn anything more in the days ahead. So
extreme organisms, extreme behavior. I mean, we're seeing extreme behavior here. You think about microplastics in the ocean, electromagnetic lines running through the ocean, the advanced, like you said, the radar stuff. I mean, those animals compared to 100, 200 years ago got to be going crazy. It's not the world they grew up in, especially in terms of like whales, where, they're living multiple hundreds of years in some cases, and same with sharks and some other species. But this is not the world they were born into. This is changing in their lifetime. So it doesn't surprise me in the least bit. Is going to be my point here, that we're seeing some extreme behavior because their environment has changed with less adaptability than ours has, and they only have so many tools to work with. I mean, these whales were ramming their heads into the side of these boats in a coordinated effort with series of clicks and whistling. They circled the boat, and by one recount, a man got bruised. That was all reported. So I'm sure the whales are taking the brunt of this compared to the people in these boats. But clearly something has upset normal behavior, at least in that area. And we have to posit on a much larger scale compared to, how we're impacting the oceans.
Absolutely. Well, as much as I would love to carry this on, I am going to try to keep us to a keep it brief 30 minutes or so schedule for these first series of shows. Really appreciate you coming on, Mark, and I appreciate our viewers and the viewers that'll be watching the archive versions of this. It is being archived at our YouTube channel and at the Facebook page of the Anomaly Archives. And like I said, I think it may have gone out to Twitter. We'll see. I'll have to go to the Twitter account and find out. And I guess for now, that's pretty much it. Thanks, Mark. And we'll be doing this again very, very soon.
Okay, everybody, be safe out there. Look forward to seeing you in the near term.
Absolutely.
Okay.